Hello everybody, this is Dan from Screaming Donkey Woodwork. Join me as I build my first box.
Nope.
Brandon Tilton says hola.
Hola.
So back about 6 months ago, I had a client reach out to me and ask if I was interested in building a wedding album box. I immediately declined and said, I am a furniture maker, sir. I make great big joints, not little cutesy ones. In general, I just knew I had no idea what I was doing, and if I did it, it would take me a long time, and the price that I would need to recoup my time would be way too much for a box. I have a hard time selling my customers on anything that I perceive as a bad value myself. But he was pretty persistent with it, really wanted me to be the one to build it. So I thought about it. I thought, man, I should try to do this. And he talked me into it. And so we agreed on a price and somewhat of a timeline. And I got to work about 6 months later. I had this chunk remaining of this termite-eaten walnut. I was really hoping to be able to get enough out of it. I really love working with this stuff. I think I'm one of the few people that see it as a value as opposed to a detriment.
You're stupid.
Thanks for the vote of confidence, babe. Cutting it's the easy part, except for the plumes of dust that come out of it when you hit the hole. These pieces are going to be used for the front and back, and they're a little bit thicker than the rest of it is, so to finish it off, I had to use a Sawzall to get all the way through it. Typically here, I've been using a handsaw to do it, and you can actually see it behind there, but I was a little feeling lazy at the moment, and it's hard to believe that my accuracy was about the same there as it would have been with a handsaw. I'm not super accurate with a handsaw. Oh, you can see my little flippy bench here. So I got these for, I think, $150 off Amazon. I thought about making my own, but my need became quite a bit more immediate than it would have been to build them. I bought that Delta table saw, and there was just no more room to even move around in my shop. So I had to do something, and I had to do it quick. The plan was to plane these down to a little bit more than a ½ inch thick. Problem is that my planer doesn't go that low, so I had to kind of shim it up using a ½ inch piece of finished plywood. For the glue up, I was going to try this technique I've seen where you can just kind of rub them together and the glue will make them kind of suction together and you don't have to put a clamp on them. But then I chickened out and grabbed some clamps. I think the technique probably works. I just didn't want to try it on a customer box the first time I did it. While I was there, I decided to go ahead and glue all the rest of the panels up, gave those a day to cure, popped them out, and then sanded or either chiseled that glue off, and then used some aluminum tape to cover the holes from the bottom side of it. Aluminum tape has become my go-to for this process, and it's more because it holds its shape than the stickiness, but it is really sticky stuff. Then we poured our Wisebond tabletop epoxy.
Wisebond.
And the tabletop epoxy usually used for a 1/4 inch or less, but in this case, there's not very much of it, so you can get away with it pouring it at a ½ inch for something like this. Most people say it takes about a day to cure, but I find it better if you let it sit for 2 days. It just will sand a whole lot better if you let the tabletop go for 2. After that, I'm going to pop it off the table, and then we will sand down the bottom side of it while removing all that aluminum. You'll notice that I use a palm sander to sand it first and get the aluminum off. And the reason I do that is because then 90% of it still stays flat, and then I can run the top portion through the drum sander. If I were to not do it this way, then I would have to reflatten the wood. So I didn't want to reflatten it. So if I just sand only on the epoxy areas and down a little bit lower, I can use this side then as the reference side to run it through the drum sander and then sand the other side, and I will not have to reflatten the wood. It's a little more tedious, but I really couldn't afford to lose much more thickness off of this because we're really close to our ½ inch target at this point, and I wanted the ½ inch to come clear right out of the drum sander. I find that flattening with the CNC is a little bit of a risk that I can end up taking off too much because sometimes a little piece of schmutz gets stuck under the board when you do it and things can happen. So the drum sander is probably the safer way to go about doing this and making sure that we keep our ½ inch of thickness that we are so desperately trying to align with. In this video, you're going to see that I use the CNC machine a whole lot, and I probably could have got away with not using it at all. I ended up doing all the roughing with the CNC, but the reality is all the fine work that I did with my other tools could have completely replaced what I did with the CNC. All right, this is a challenge with the CNC. This is a dogging technique. So when we say dogging, it's just like holding things down to the bench so we can cut it without it flying around. If I'm going to screw up, this is a big place for me to screw up, is not properly securing down the material before I cut it. I cannot even count on 2 hands and 2 feet how many times I have screwed this up. So what I'm doing here is using CA glue and a little bit of accelerator and using tape and taping it down, and it worked very well. So not always, but in this case, that was the right way to go about it. So here I'm cutting out some finger joints using the CNC machine, and then we came back and we used a pattern on some like vines to add into the surface of each one of the box faces. Now, there's no doubt that with my hands I could never carve those vines out, but the finger joints I definitely probably should have done without the assistance of the CNC whatsoever. As good as they look here, you'll notice that the corners are rounded over on them, so it would not make a nice tight joint when I went to go glue it up because everything's rounded over. A 3-axis CNC really has no way to make sharp lines unless they are on the surface, and we do that with a V-carve bit. Here I used a syringe, filled it with tabletop epoxy, tinted to the color that I wanted using some dyes and some pigments, and then just filled everything in. Any of the pits that opened up during the sanding process, we used and filled that with black. And with all of this epoxy, we're using the Wise Bond tabletop epoxy. I finished all of them off by hitting them with a torch every 15 minutes for about an hour. The torch pops all the bubbles and lowers the viscosity, ensuring that every little nook and cranny is filled with epoxy. Once it's cured, I take it over to the drum sander, which is not interesting or fun whatsoever. It's kind of like listening to my wife tell a story.
You're stupid.
Yes, I am. For the most part, sanding sucks. It's kind of boring. It makes bad content, except for when you're sanding off the epoxy and you are slowly revealing the pour that you did earlier. We were just about to do glue up, and the customer called and said, hey, can you add our last name kind of mixed with the word box added to the top of this box? And I said, yeah, sure, no problem. And then so we did that, and I put a bunch of symbols up, and I thought it was going to be funny and like make a heart symbol, but I called my wife up, and one of the ones was a heart symbol with some genitals mixed in with it. And so I moved them off to the side, but I didn't take them out of the program. So after we cut this, off to the side on my table, I now have a heart-shaped wing that got carved into the spoil board on my CNC machine. My whole marriage is based off of food and a series of dick jokes. It was time for a dry fit, and you could see during this dry fit that the finger joints don't seat all the way, and that's because they're still curved on the edges there where they should be lined up. So it gets kind of close, but nothing goes in quite all the way. Don't forget, if you try hard enough, everything's a hammer. So while I was stewing about how I was going to correct my problem with the finger joints, I went ahead and carved out the little pieces that would eventually become the hinges. And we cut those out of a cookie because they needed to be long grain as opposed to end grain. The other way to do that would be to make a long dowel, but I was too scared I would screw up the placement of the center hole. So I decided on using the table saw to clean up the edges on each one of those finger joints. And you can see here that I could have completely just skipped the CNC altogether and used this jig to create my finger joints. The one thing here I wish I had done a little bit different is I wish I would have got a blade that had flat tips on it. And if I would have done that, it would have made them a little bit more square, because I did have to go back and clean up each individual finger joint a little bit with a chisel afterward. A typical saw blade, the tips are angled left and right, so it leaves a little tiny V piece in the middle there. Here I had to cut out a rabbet. The bit that I had was a little bit too thick, plus I wasn't comfortable resting on the very edge of it, so I made a lip, carved it down, and I was able to make a nice little rabbet that will fit the bottom of the box. I rough cut out a piece of Baltic birch standing up on top of my steps with the jigsaw, then took it over the table saw, cut it down to final dimensions. I keyed this so one corner is sharp and the other three were rounded so it would go in the right way. I knew there would be a little bit of variation to this when it was going in, and I wanted to make sure that when they put it back in, they put it back in the right way all the time. So this took me to my next lesson learned. If I ever do this again, I will cut the bottom piece slightly smaller so that I could put the staples in the edge of the board. And that is a little bit of a lie, because that's actually what we ended up doing. I went back and pared down that board just a little bit and then put the staples in the side so they were better hidden, and it looked better. So in the end, that's what I did end up doing. But I didn't capture any video of it, because very often when you're pissed off and you have to redo something, you don't want to be fumbling around with the camera. So I kept the images stock in there. Now, I did find an issue with the flatness of my router table when we were carving out the back here for the hinges, and you could see it kind of push up and down a little bit right there. I solved that later on, and this again is another process I ended up having to do twice, because I had a problem, needed to fix it, and went back. But unfortunately, the only one that I recorded was the one when I did it poorly. So I got some 1/4-inch brass rod, and I'm going ahead and sticking on the hinge pieces that I cut out on the CNC. Again, you could do a dowel and drill a hole through the center of each one of those. I just had zero faith in myself to be able to hit the center of those, and I have a CNC machine, so cutting them out of a cookie was the right way to go for me. I cut a bunch out of the cookie, and as you might know with cookie, sometimes you're going to get checks and stuff that are within that cookie. So I just cut way more than I needed and only picked the best ones. So here we alternate the tape. By the way, this part was completely redone too, and I actually show the screw up on this part to why I had to redo it. So remember I said that my router table was off, so that's what caused the issue. But this is the gist of it. Every other slot gets paste wax in it, and then you put glue in the other side. And the top is the exact opposite of what the bottom is. So then the idea is you stick your hinge in there and press them together, and everything should work perfect. But you saw my router table, it was all wonky when we went through it, and that caused a problem. So, yeah, that doesn't sound right at all, does it? So after I fixed the flatness on the routing table, I went back, pulled that hinge out, rerouted it. Like I said, I made a ton more extra hinge pieces. So the ones that were not intact, I just used some other ones. We did it again. The second time, it worked a whole hell of a lot better. It still did not end up being perfect, because I had two side-by-side hinge pieces stick together. Although that was as good as I could do with this. And you could see right there, I had to go back and fill some of the slots back in with some additional glue and reclamp it, because they were stuck to the ones next to it. So I had to clamp it for 24 hours, pulled it back. In the end, it did pretty well, but there still are two hinge pieces that should be alternating rotation where they were stuck next to each other. I definitely will do this again at some point to get it down perfect, but man, it was really hard. I had a hard time with it. And I really couldn't do anymore, or I would have screwed up the aesthetics of the box. I didn't mess up the aesthetics of it, but it doesn't work exactly perfect how I would want it to. But the hinge is nice and smooth, and it functions properly, and the box looks good when it's closed. When it's open, if you really know where you're supposed to be looking, you could see where I screwed it up. So eventually I want one more crack at it. All right, so here again, I'm doing something with the CNC machine that you probably should not do. So I wanted to make clawfoot legs for this. And I wasn't going to make any legs for this box, but then, the buyer came back and said, "Oh, you're going to put some cool legs on this, right?" And I was like, yeah, sure, I'll do that." So I had this idea to where we would carve it out in two halves, glue them together, and that way I would kind of get some of the detail that you would get if, I had a CNC machine with one more axis on it. So I only have a 3-axis CNC, so I can't really do full 3D shapes on it. But this was as close as I could figure out to make something on the CNC that was 3D without having, a 4-axis CNC machine. And I picked claw feet because I've always kind of been obsessed with claw feet. I always wanted like a clawfoot tub or something like that. So here I put it in. Probably shouldn't have tried to pull it out. And yeah, no, it's too late. We're just going to pull one out. Now this technique definitely did work, but it definitely required more work on my side than I thought it would. I thought, we'll glue these together, cut a couple of the sides out, and rock and roll will be done. It wasn't that whatsoever. So on this, though, I did learn a brand new kind of fancy technique is where you can most of the way CNC something and then finish the carving out by hand. So I saw this guy, he makes these tables with like alligators and boats and stuff in them. And I always thought he was like carving it out with a chainsaw and doing it all by hand. But he's using this same technique. I found one video where he's got it on the CNC machine, and I kind of figured out he's doing the greater majority of the work on the CNC machine and then coming back and finishing up with small hand tools like this. So this is a Dremel with a little end mill on it, and I'm cleaning up stuff. That might be a rasp, but doesn't matter. Did most of it on the CNC, had some excess that I had to cut off using the bandsaw, and everything that I did, you get to be like a little bit creative, kind of figuring it out. I would get it all kind of close and then go back and sand a whole bunch of it. So there was a whole lot of work that went into making these claw feet. A lot more than I thought there would be. I thought the CNC would help me accomplish more of it. But it is a really neat technique, to do the roughing and the majority of it with the CNC machine and then coming back and finishing it by hand. I definitely will be doing more of that. Really, if I'm continuing to build large flat panels and furniture, 4-axis is about the maximum of what I would be able to cut to. The 5-axis stuff, yeah, that may help a little bit more doing like undercuts and whatnot. So I think about this a little bit and, think about where we're going to end up with what we're doing. I think I'm happy now with my little 3-axis. I think it's cool to go ahead and like do these things and finish them out by hand. I enjoy, this part of it much more than programming the CNC. Even here, just carving out the remainder of what was left in the corner there, that was actually really fun. I had to do it 4 times. I can imagine, though, if I had to do it 20 times, it would become very repetitive. But I'm not in a production shop, right? I just get to make whatever I want for whoever I want, and during that, it's totally fun. The glue up of the box was fairly uneventful, but I still had to go back and fill in our Brovox and our little heart and symbol there. It's got the infinity symbol underneath the heart there. And the last little piece that I was going to add on here is this wooden clasp. And I screwed this up too. So same issue that I had before when I was making the rabbit, because basically that's what this is a little rabbit to hold the clasp, is that it wasn't quite thick enough. Nope. Yep. could not cut it that way, so got it most of the way there and then came back and hit it with a jigsaw. Did you see that flip-flop foot reflex? No, we're going to have to slow-mo that one. Boom, and that's why I have all my piggies. Yeah, definitely don't be like me, though. Definitely wear steel-toe boots in your shop. Also, you probably want to have on a helmet and some of those orange water wings. I also suggest a safety vest and a shirt that says, "I'm special." All right, there it was. That's how I screwed this up. I accidentally touched the side when I was doing the plunge in there with the router. I didn't notice it till we got all the way to the bottom and we carved it into the wood. Actually, I saw it happen, but I thought it was so much higher than where the bearing was going to touch that I would not mess up the template. But I screwed the template up and then it transferred right into the wood. So we carved that right into the front of the box. So there was a little sliver on the side there. Thankfully, though, this has a lot of epoxy in it. So where I screwed it up, we put epoxy in it, and I could see it. You could probably see it now that I've pointed it out, but it did not look bad. And if it did, I would have carved around it and filled around it in with epoxy to kind of make it all match. And here you can see the little lump around the right-hand side there. So I leave the latch a little tiny bit proud because the way it's designed to be able to sand up to an 1/8 inch off of it. I left about a 1/16 proud, and that's just so we could bring it down to perfectly flush. I also needed to be really careful about where I put the glue because if you put it on the back side of the bottom piece of the latch there, you risk gluing the latch together forever. And here you can see how that rear hinge almost completely disappears. I really like the look of rounded over finger joints, so I decided to go ahead and do that, but there's a risk of some tear out. And of course, we got a little bit of tear out, and we fixed that with some UV epoxy. A nice, quick, easy, and simple fix. And if you look at the bottom right-hand corner there, you can see where I messed up the hinge. That was actually one of the simpler fixes because we just filled it in with some plastic filler. I know I recorded fixing that, but I may have put it on the camera and not hit record because I can't find the footage of it anywhere. All right, so you may notice that Becca is using the Natura finish out of a syringe, and that's something that we've been doing pretty much on a regular basis now. I haven't said much about it because I wasn't all that super sure on how it would all work, but it seems to be working pretty great. The idea there is we mix up as much hard wax as we think we're going to be using for a project, and then if there's any left over, we stick it in a syringe and put the cap on it. And I was worried that it would start to cure, and it kind of does start to cure a little bit, but it doesn't cure all the way. And then you can still apply it afterward, and when you apply it, then it takes less time to get fully cured. So if you have some of this saved up and you need something to cure in, say, 3 days, you can use this and it will cure faster. And I've checked it versus, when we put it on straight out of the bottle, straight mixed up, and it is the same hardness. I'm still not super comfortable recommending this process to everyone yet because who knows, maybe the finish lasts less long, like in 10 years. I don't know. And I'm sure if we ask the manufacturer, they're going to say, absolutely do not do that because obviously they all want to sell you more finish. But there might be actually 2 reasons. They may want to sell you more finish and it may degrade the quality of the product that you're putting on. So I don't know. If you try it at your own risk. I attached the legs and that leather stopping strap with some brass screws to match our brass dowel for the hinge, and I think it turned out pretty good. It definitely makes me want to do another box. The legs there are holding on the bottom, so if they ever want to change out that green velvet, they can put something else in there. They just take the legs off and the bottom will pop right out. Opening and closing this makes the world's greatest ka-chunk sound, so I was a big fan of opening and closing it repeatedly. Now, you might be sitting there watching and thinking, hey, you probably should have tried an easier box for your first box. And if you're saying that, you're probably totally right, but for me, it's all about learning how to do new things. So I wanted to do as hard as I could think of, and this was the hardest I could think of with joints that I knew I would be mostly capable of doing. Now, doing the wooden hinge probably wasn't the smartest thing in the world, but next time I'll get better. So get weird with wood. If you like what you saw here and you want to see me do more, the best way to help me do that is to like, share, and subscribe. Sharing is probably the best thing you could do. Interacting is awesome. And check out some of my other content here, because what else are you going to do? Take grandma to get her mustache waxed. Finally have that uncomfortable conversation with your spouse. Do some goat yoga. Move to Florida and become a Florida man. Make national headlines. Challenge your neighbor to a duel.